All right, so we're diving deep into the happiness hypothesis today. You wanted to explore how like ancient wisdom and modern psychology kind of, intersect when it comes to finding happiness and meaning in life. So we're going to unpack some of the big ideas from Jonathan Haidt's book using the audiobook excerpts you gave us.
Yeah, and what I think is so interesting about the book is that uh, Haidt doesn't shy away from some of the big, like, almost unanswerable questions.
Yeah.
Like, are we really in control of our own minds? And he uses this metaphor to explore that idea. It's the divided mind, this metaphor of the rational writer and the emotional elephant.
Okay, I love a good metaphor. So break this one down for me a little.
Sure. So you can imagine it like this. The writer is like the conscious part of us, the part that's setting goals and making plans. But the elephant, that's all about automatic processes, all those gut feelings, those reactions we have that aren't always thought out. And often the elephant is just like way stronger than the writer.
So it's like you're trying to steer this like massive creature that has its own ideas about where to go.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pretty powerful image, right? And Haidt argues that while the writer can try to influence the elephant, it can't always, completely control it. Think about all those times when you know you should do something,
Yeah.
like eat healthy or go to the gym,
Yeah.
but then you just like can't seem to make yourself do it.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling all too well. It's like my elephant has a serious sweet tooth. But why is it that our elephants seem to have this like pull towards negativity? Like even when things are going well, there's that part of us that fixates on the anxieties and worries.
Well, there's a reason for that, and it's actually rooted in our evolutionary history. It's this thing called the negativity bias.
Mm.
So our brains basically are wired to pay more attention to threats than to rewards.
That makes sense from a survival perspective. You know, our ancestors who are more in tune with danger were more likely to avoid getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger.
Exactly. Those who focus on the positive might not have survived long enough to pass on their genes, right? But yeah, even though we're not worried about saber-toothed tigers anymore, we still have that same brain wiring. We're still walking around with brains that are hyper-focused on the negative.
So it's like, evolutionarily speaking, our brains are still playing catch up, even though the threats we face today are well, a little different.
Mm.
But I'm curious about this. If we're wired this way, then where does happiness even come from? Is it even possible?
That's really the central question of the happiness hypothesis. And to answer it, Haidt brings in ideas from all over the place. Ancient philosophy, modern psychology, even neuroscience. He starts by looking at ancient wisdom, like the teachings of Buddha and the Stoics. They emphasized finding happiness within, detaching from the external desires that can lead us astray.
So that classic idea of inner peace, finding contentment no matter what's happening in the outside world.
Right. But Haidt doesn't just stop there. He also brings in modern research, which shows that while that internal work is super important, there are certain external factors that can really affect our well-being too.
Yeah.
He even presents a happiness formula.
Oh, formula. I love a good formula. Break that down for me.
All right, so the formula is H equals S plus C plus V.
All right, so H is for happiness, but what's the rest?
So S is your set point. That's basically like your baseline happiness, the level you naturally gravitate towards. And then C stands for your life conditions, things like health and socioeconomic status, things we can't always control.
Okay, so what about V?
V is where things get interesting. That stands for voluntary activities.
The things we actively choose to do, our hobbies, our relationships, how we spend our time.
Exactly. And Haidt argues that those voluntary activities have a much bigger impact on our happiness than we think they do, because we're actively choosing them. It keeps us engaged and prevents us from falling into like a rut.
It's not just accepting what is, but actively choosing things that add to our lives, things that bring us joy and a sense of purpose.
Exactly. We're not just passive recipients of happiness. We have a role to play in creating it. But Haidt doesn't shy away from some of the trickier parts of human nature either.
Yeah.
He talks about this concept of moral hypocrisy. How we often believe we're good people, even when our actions might not always line up with that belief.
Oh, yeah. That whole do as I say, not as I do thing, right? But if we're all prone to that kind of self-deception, is there any hope for us? Can we, actually find a way to be better?
Well, he talks about that too, and he describes this really interesting experiment.
I love a good psychology experiment. What do they do?
Okay, so imagine you're asked to divide like some kind of reward fairly, between yourself and someone else,
Yeah.
most people say they would flip a coin, to be fair.
Right, to make it random.
Yeah. But here's the thing. When the coin flip doesn't go their way, a lot of people conveniently forget about the coin toss and just take the bigger reward for themselves anyway.
Wow, that's kind of sneaky. But also, I can see myself doing that. I mean, who hasn't, fudged the rules a little when it benefited them?
Exactly. It's like we all have these moments of um, moral flexibility, I guess you could say. We bend the rules a bit when it's convenient. And he argues that this tendency towards moral hypocrisy is just like built into us. We have this inner lawyer that's always ready to jump in and justify our actions, even when we know deep down that we're not being totally honest.
So it's like our brains are playing tricks on us. But if we're all susceptible to that, is there anything we can do about it?
That's what we're going to explore next time when we dive into part 2 of the happiness hypothesis. We'll look at some of the ways we can overcome those self-serving biases and start to see ourselves and the world around us more clearly.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Can't wait to see what other insights Haidt has to offer. So we left off talking about how our brains can sometimes play tricks on us, especially when it comes to like justifying our own actions, even when they're maybe not so great. But I was thinking about this. It seems like our minds also overestimate the impact of things, both good and bad.
Oh, totally. Haidt talks about this too. He calls it the hedonic treadmill.
Yeah, the hedonic treadmill. I've heard that term before, but I don't know. It always kind of makes me think of like hamsters running in a wheel. What does it actually mean?
Okay, well, imagine you get on a treadmill, right? You're putting in all this effort, all this energy, but you're not actually getting anywhere. Haidt uses this comparison of lottery winners and paraplegics to illustrate this.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty big contrast. I mean, winning the lottery, that seems like, the ultimate happiness boost.
Hmm.
And well, becoming paralyzed seems like it would bring, like immense and lasting sadness.
You would think so, right? But what's interesting is that research actually shows that both groups, they tend to return to their baseline levels of happiness within about a year. It's like our minds, they have this amazing ability to adapt, not just to good fortune, but also to tragedy.
So even if you win millions, that initial rush of excitement eventually fades, and then your new life, I mean, this just becomes the new normal.
Yeah, it's like the change itself that gives you that big surge of happiness, not actually being wealthy.
Hmm.
And similarly, if someone experiences a devastating injury, of course there's going to be this period of grief, of adjustment. But over time, a lot of people find ways to, create new meaning and joy in their lives, even within those limitations.
It's like a reminder that happiness isn't always about our external circumstances. Maybe it's more about our internal state,
Yeah.
our mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And this whole idea of adaptation really challenges that belief that we can find like lasting happiness by just acquiring more things or reaching like these specific milestones, that whole if I just achieve X, then I'll finally be happy kind of thinking.
That makes me think of that saying about keeping up with the Joneses, always striving for, a bigger house, fancier car. Is that kind of like the recipe for getting stuck on the hedonic treadmill?
It could be, yeah. Because even when we reach that next level, or we get that new possession, our minds adapt and then that satisfaction, it kind of fades away. And then we need even more to get back to that same level of happiness.
So are we all just doomed to like chase happiness forever? Is there any way to like get off this treadmill?
That's where some of those ideas from ancient wisdom, they can really help. Like Buddha and the Stoics, they recognized this trap of chasing external desires. They thought the key was to find happiness within.
Detach from the material world,
Yeah,
cultivate like inner peace.
right. And Haidt brings in those ancient ideas, but he combines them with modern research too, emphasizing the difference between those life conditions like we talked about and voluntary activities. Remember that happiness formula?
Yes, H equals S plus C plus V. So happiness is based on our set point plus life conditions plus those voluntary activities.
Exactly. And while we can't always control, our set point or all those life conditions, it's those voluntary activities, those things that we choose to do that can make a big
So
difference.
like our hobbies, our relationships, how we spend our time, things like that.
Exactly. Doing those things, especially those that are, aligned with our values and interests, that can be a really powerful way to step off that hedonic treadmill. They give us a sense of purpose, of fulfillment that goes beyond just, chasing fleeting pleasure.
It's interesting. It's not about like denying pleasure or ignoring the outside world, right? It's about finding a balance, a place where our like inner world and outer world sort of align.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Oh.
It's recognizing that we have, some agency in shaping our own happiness. But speaking of challenges, even when we are working towards happiness and, fulfillment, we still run into obstacles. And
Hmm.
some of those obstacles are, well, they're our own
Oh,
biases.
yeah, those rose-colored glasses that make it hard to see our own flaws. But this isn't just about like individual biases, is it? This plays out in our relationships too, right? Like even in society.
Oh, absolutely. Haidt talks about how these biases can totally distort how we see other people, and it creates all this, conflict and resentment. And he uses this term naive realism to describe it. It's this tendency to think that we see the world objectively while everyone else is like blinded by their own biases.
It's like that saying everyone thinks they're a good driver, even though statistically speaking, that can't possibly be true.
Right. Exactly. We overestimate our own abilities and virtues while underestimating those of others. And this can lead to all sorts of problems in our interactions. It can make us feel entitled, you know,
Wow.
and we're quick to judge others who don't meet our expectations, which are often, kind of unrealistic.
And this kind of ties back to that idea of moral hypocrisy, right? It's like these biases they're like our own personal inner lawyers,
Really?
always there to, protect our egos and justify our actions, even when, well, maybe we're not being our best selves.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting connection. But, hate doesn't just leave us with all this doom and gloom about human nature. He actually offers some practical advice on how we can overcome these challenges. He talks about how we can develop more self-awareness and compassion.
Okay, so what's the secret? How do we start to, see ourselves and other people more clearly?
Well, he says the key is it's cultivating a sense of humility and curiosity,
Hmm.
recognizing that we're all susceptible to these biases, that our view of the world isn't always accurate.
So it's about stepping back from that I'm right, you're wrong mentality and being more open to the possibility that, well, that maybe we're missing something.
Exactly. And one really powerful exercise he suggests is to actually look for our own faults in conflicts. Instead of focusing on what the other person did wrong, maybe we should start by examining our own behavior.
It's like flipping the script. Instead of pointing fingers, we're turning inward.
Right, which can be super challenging because, like we talked about, those inner lawyers, they want to jump in and defend us right away.
Right.
But if we can resist that urge to justify ourselves and genuinely try to acknowledge our mistakes, it can lead to, better understanding and make it easier to reconcile with the other person.
So taking responsibility, even when it's hard, can actually strengthen our relationships and help us find more, inner peace.
Exactly. And, this practice of looking inward, of acknowledging our own flaws, it actually connects back to what Haidt calls the perfect way.
Okay, the perfect way. That sounds pretty intriguing. Tell me more about this perfect way.
He argues that by, trying to be less judgmental and practicing empathy, we can create more happiness and harmony in our relationships. It's about moving beyond that us versus them mentality and realizing that ultimately we're all in this together. We're all part of the same human experience.
So it's about cultivating understanding and compassion
Yeah.
for ourselves and for other people.
Yeah, exactly. It's a journey of, of inner growth that can lead to greater happiness and fulfillment. But there's another layer to this idea of the perfect way that connects to something even bigger than ourselves, like the search for meaning and purpose in life. And that's something that we'll explore in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back and I'm really excited to dig into this idea of a perfect way and how it connects to meaning and purpose. I mean, I think, we all struggle with these big questions, right? At some point in our lives, like what's it all about? What's the point?
Yeah, those are some pretty fundamental questions, right? Like what's the meaning of life, all that. And what I really appreciate about Haidt's approach is that he doesn't shy away from them. And he brings in these really interesting perspectives from, ancient philosophy to modern research. It's a really nice blend of, old and new wisdom.
So, how does hate approach these questions about meaning and purpose? Where does he even start?
Well, he talks about this idea of the vertical dimension of uh, of human existence. It's this like built-in sense that there's something more to life than just, our own individual happiness. There's this yearning for something like sacred, something that transcends our everyday experiences.
So, it's like a spiritual dimension, even if you don't necessarily, follow a specific religion.
Exactly. He talks about how, even atheists can experience like awe and wonder, that feeling of connection to something bigger than themselves. And he even uses his own research on moral emotions to kind of illustrate this point.
Okay, moral emotions. We touched on this a little bit earlier. Can you remind me how those fit into this idea of a vertical dimension?
Sure. So think about emotions like disgust, elevation, and awe. So disgust, that's often like a gut reaction to something we see as like wrong or impure, a violation of our moral code.
Yeah.
But elevation and awe, those emotions lift us up, they expand our sense of self and make us feel connected to something bigger.
Oh yeah, I get that. Like when you see, I don't know, an amazing act of kindness or you're out in nature and you just like feel this overwhelming sense of awe. Like those moments that give you goosebumps where you feel like really deeply moved.
Exactly. And Haidt argues that those emotions, especially elevation and awe, they're really important for understanding like religious experiences
Hmm.
and why we search for meaning. It points to this deep desire we all have for connection and transcendence.
So it's not just about, seeking personal happiness. It's about tapping into something larger than ourselves, finding a purpose that goes beyond our own individual lives.
Exactly. And he even suggests that maybe this search for meaning is even more important than the pursuit of happiness itself.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
So you're saying that finding like purpose and meaning could actually lead to a deeper, more lasting form of happiness than like just chasing pleasure or avoiding pain.
That's what the research seems to suggest, yeah.
Yeah.
When we feel connected to something bigger than ourselves, when our actions are guided by a sense of purpose, it brings a different kind of fulfillment. It's a happiness that's grounded in something much deeper.
It makes me think back to those voluntary activities we talked about. Doing things that align with our values, using our skills to, contribute to something bigger than ourselves. Those actions, they often create that sense of purpose, of meaning.
Absolutely. It's about finding that place where your passions and your talents kind of intersect with a sense of meaning, of contribution. And, that's where this idea of the perfect way kind of comes full circle.
Okay, remind me again how the perfect way fits into all of this.
Well, remember we talked about, trying to be less judgmental, practicing empathy, and recognizing that, like, shared humanity we all have. Those are all really key parts of finding that perfect way of building a life that's both meaningful and fulfilling.
So it's about moving beyond like just our own selfish desires or egos and connecting to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. It's not just about finding meaning in life. It's about creating meaning through life, through your actions, your relationships, how you contribute to the world.
I love that. That's really inspiring. But it also feels I don't know, a bit daunting. Like how do we find that perfect way? Is there like a roadmap, a step-by-step guide?
Well, I wish there was a simple answer, but there's not really a one-size-fits-all,
No.
It's a process of self-discovery that takes time.
Eh.
But hate does offer some guidance.
Okay, like what kind of advice does he give?
Well, he encourages people to really explore their values, their interests, the things that make them curious. Experiment, try new things. Notice what really speaks to you, what makes you feel, like alive and engaged.
It's almost like we have to become like archaeologists of our own, souls,
Yeah.
digging deep to uncover those hidden treasures that can like point us towards our purpose.
I love that. That's a great analogy. And remember, it's an ongoing process, not like, a destination you reach and then you're done.
Yeah.
Our values and interests, they might change over time, and that's okay. The key is to stay curious and open to new possibilities and just trust the journey itself is part of finding that perfect way.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. The happiness hypothesis it's really thought-provoking. It's given me so much to think about, in my own life and about how I interact with the world.
I'm glad to hear that. It's definitely a book that stays with you.
Yeah, it really does. And as we wrap up, this question keeps coming back to me. If, material wealth and prestige, if those things don't really lead to lasting happiness, then what are those like luxury goods of the soul? The things that truly make a life worth living.
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that each of us has to answer for ourselves. But I do think the happiness hypothesis gives us some pretty valuable clues. It's about cultivating those qualities of mind and heart that let us live with more wisdom, compassion, and purpose.
So it's not about the external stuff. It's about that inner journey, that cultivation of those luxury goods of the soul. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the happiness hypothesis. I hope it's given you some new insights and, inspired you to keep exploring these questions about happiness, meaning, and purpose. Keep seeking those luxury goods of the soul.